Welcome to Conversations with Educators. My name is Jerome Ellison, and today I have a special guest and friend by the name of Sarah Elrafei. Thank you, Sarah, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. So I'm going to start with opening questions. These are just like getting to know you kind of questions. So the first question I'll ask is, can you let us know what grade and what subjects do you teach?
So this year in particular is like a little bit different because this year I'm teaching 9th through 12th grade. So I'm teaching high school for the first time. And I'm teaching a class called 9th grade seminar in particular and 10th grade seminar. And 9th grade seminar is all about trying to talk about, it's kind of like a fusion of sociology and psychology where you talk about like issues that are pertinent to today. So it's a little bit of current events, but it's really trying to understand like what affects 9th graders in the moment that we are in now in 2020. It's basically a course about identity. So talking about things like age, race, gender, sexuality. In 10th grade, it's more about, it's got like a little bit of a mental health lens. And then in 11th and 12th grade, I'm doing like a peer mentorship program between the older kids and middle schoolers, where I basically teach the older kids how to facilitate discussions around things like race, gender, and all those things.
Wow.
So it's a little bit of
all the subjects.
Yeah. But 9th grade seminar is going to be like my main gig.
Okay.
But this is going to be my 6th year teaching. And prior to this, I mostly taught 6th grade social studies. A little bit of other stuff around that too.
So now you're doing 9 through 12. You ready? You feel comfortable with it? You feel good? It's a different age group.
Being recorded, I'll say yes.
Makes sense.
But no, I definitely think like middle school is kind of my jam and my bread and butter. So hopefully, I know I'll get used to it. It's just new for me. It's different.
You'll be good. You'll be good. All right, so I'm going to get into some bigger questions, like some deeper questions. The first one is like your teacher backstory. So why did you choose to become a teacher?
So for me, all right, so let me start by saying that I have a brother who's 10 years younger than me. And I always kind of felt like a combination between like a mother, a sister, and a teacher to him. And so that was a really big part of me realizing that I love kids and I get along really well with them and we just kind of understand each other. But then beyond that, I don't know, I feel like I was kind of like awakened and enlightened to things like racial and social injustice and economic inequality, and like the really important racial component that economic inequality has when I was in high school, and even more so in college when I started majoring in sociology and was considering majoring in things like African American studies. And I tried to figure out like, what can I do with my life that would be able to address that? Like, what can I personally do? Because to me, there is like no issue as important as that to talk about and learn about and figure out. And so teaching kind of seemed like the natural next step. It was like a way to like really do this work at the ground level. I was interested in elementary and middle school education at first because it seemed like I could kind of like get kids early in talking about these things before they got older and had more like developed ideas around these things. And it just also felt like a way that, I don't know, I could like really focus my attention on the kids who needed it most, with a teacher who cared about them the most. So that's a big part of why I went into teaching.
That's great. That's great. And I think it's great that you have that experience, like you're getting that experience from like the early ages all the way up, because then you can see like the trajectory of kids and you can kind of craft wherever you end up for the long term. You can always craft like where you know where they came from and you know where you want them to go and you can like prepare them for that.
I've seen kind of everything, so I have like the context.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right. My next question, and this may be hard to think about, so you can take as much time as you need, but what is your most positive, memorable moment so far as a teacher?
So I've taught in a couple of different contexts. So my first teaching job with you was at a public school in Brooklyn that I really loved, but it was a challenging place to work because of all the sort of like the typical things that you hear with public schools, with issues around funding and I don't know, honestly, issues around nice white parents who get in the way. Shout out to the Nice White Parents podcast on the New York Times, which everyone
you told me about that. Yeah,
listen to. Yeah,
I have to check it out.
Got to. But and the student body at that school was predominantly Black and brown children. It was fairly diverse. There were also white kids there and white families, but it was definitely it aired more on the low socioeconomic and mostly Black and brown end. I spent like 2.5 years there. Half of that year was one of the half years was like subbing. And then the next 2 years I spent at a super, super wealthy private school in Manhattan. That I mean, that in a lot of ways that was a dream job, but it definitely had its issues. I was teaching mostly kids who were, you know, they did things like listen to hip hop, but then would do some fairly egregious, you know, they'll say and do things that are kind of racist, partially because they don't know, and also because that's kind of like the environment that they grew up in, and there's so many reasons behind it. And so my goal sort of quickly became to try to teach the privileged students who I knew would grow up to be in positions of power about things like race and racism. And so while I was there, I developed a course, or I took a course that I had started teaching at my first school and kind of furthered it and developed it into a course on understanding systemic racism through hip hop, because I knew that hip hop was something that all the kids really gravitated to. It's kind of this like universal language. It's the #1 genre in the world right now, or at least in the country. I don't know about the world. Don't quote me on that.
I think it's that big. Yeah.
It's really big, but people don't understand it. And some people will like it and just say, you know, like it's kind of a vibe, or we like the beat, but like don't listen to the lyrics like that. That's not, you know, we don't condone that. And they really don't understand that there's depth to these lyrics and there's meaning to it. And even the ones that seem kind of on surface level, like Cardi B, for example, like it's just kind of all vapid. Like there's something about, we should be asking questions about like, why is it vapid? Where is that coming from? Or like, why is she so focused on things like sex and money? There is some really important like sociological analysis to be done there. And that's just as valuable as deeper music, or things that on the surface level seem like deeper music, or it's as valuable as studying Shakespeare, in my opinion. Anyway, so I digress. So
what's one memory that's the most positive from all of those experiences?
So in that class that I developed, we have this end of class rap and poetry slam. So basically they spend the whole week learning about hip hop and racial justice, and they learn about one institution a day where you can see racism. That's obviously every institution, but we focus on 4 of them. And then we take a song, and that becomes our text, a hip hop song where where that rapper talks about that institution. And then at the end and the second half of class, so after they've done all that learning, they go and start working on their own rap or poem about one of 3 things, either some kind of struggle or oppression that they have faced. And honestly, it ended up being my Black students who would often take that prompt, or they would sort of write to educate others. So I'd say, you know, like write a letter in the form of a poem or a song to your like racist uncle. Because that's what artists do, right? Like they write they write to educate, or they write to express, or they write to inspire. Not that many kids took me up on that one though. Anyway, so I think by far the most memorable experience I have in the classroom is my last rap and poetry slam that I did.
One that I went to? Was that the one I came to?
You came, no? Yeah, you came to
on Zoom.
So that one was really, really big because it was kind of happening at the time of the Ahmaud Arbery shooting, killing, around right before George Floyd was murdered. And then the one before that, which was in person, that was before COVID hit. That one I would say is probably my most memorable, because it was a room mostly filled with Black families and a couple of white families who were, honestly, a few of them were really not hip to this stuff. Like they were learning for the first time about systemic racism from 11 and 12 and 13-year-old kids, Black kids and white kids. And the room was just like filled with emotion and tears and like learning, like, and education. Like so many people learned in that space, and the people who didn't learn were feeling seen for the first time in the predominantly white school. And so it was just this incredibly poignant, moving hour and a half. And even after it was over, everybody kind of just stayed and was like, we don't want to leave this thing that we've created here. And it was like a community was created in an hour, and it was just really beautiful. That whole week has been like my like favorite thing about teaching, but that day in particular was amazing.
That's powerful. I think especially with younger kids, a lot of people feel like they don't get it, or they don't realize race, or they don't see it. But when you can actually hear it from kids that are 11 or 12 and see how aware they are and how much of an impact it has on their lives, I think that can be more powerful, because, you know, kids are our future. And if they're noticing it, it's positive because you can see that their work, they want change. But also for people, like you said, like some of the parents who weren't aware of it, it's like that probably was an eye opener to see that their kids and their friends, kids of their friends, also are aware of it and can articulate and express their feelings, the deep feelings about the issues.
And it was like, it's proof that kids are never too young to talk about this stuff. Like issues around race start the second that a kid is born, and kids start picking up on this stuff the second that they're born. And so to ignore it or to dismiss it as something that kids aren't, you know, old enough or have the verbiage to talk about is just kind of a cop-out.
Yeah.
Yes, to be honest.
Yeah. And I think, again, that's so important, again, because some parents of privilege who have the opportunity to like avoid the conversation with their kids and just say, if I'm a good person, my kid's going to be a good person. But a lot of times, if you're not having that conversation with your child, they're learning from the world and they're picking up things that may be good for them or may be bad for them. But unless you're talking to them and understanding them and grooming them to be, I would call anti-racist or just good people in the world, then you don't really know. You don't really have any control. You're not really impacting your child's upbringing in that way. And they're only learning from these subliminal messages that you may be sending them, which may be harmful if they're just looking at sometimes the people you hang out with or how you treat people of color. They can pick up a lot of messages from that as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to switch. I want to switch to the opposite side, because I know education, being a teacher, is such a difficult position and career to choose. So what was the most difficult moment as a teacher you have experienced so far, or challenging?
Yeah, I think like both times, like when you asked me this question and when you asked me the question about the best time, I kind of like, I feel like my first job and my second job are like two different worlds and like different, like I mean, yeah, they were both teaching, but they feel like two different things. So my mind goes to two places. But I think the first that I think of is like there were a couple of moments at my most recent school where basically any moment where a white kid is kind of pushing back on the things that I'm teaching them, and I have to respond in a way that, and I have to engage in a conversation that kind of defends the dignity and humanity of Black folks, and there are Black students in the room. It just feels like an impossible moment where you have to teach this white kid at the expense of the Black kid's like entire being. And so I have a particular moment where that happened, where it just like, it was really, really challenging. And it just kind of makes me consider like the drawbacks of integration, to be honest, and how difficult it is to teach kids that are just so entirely different from each other. But the moment I'm thinking of is when we were playing a game. This isn't even like related to teaching, like instruction or content, but we were like playing a game. It was like a Friday in like an equivalent of advisory. And there are two Black students in the room, and the rest of the students are white. And this one white boy, kind of like, I think what did he do exactly? He pointed to, or like went to touch the hair of one of the Black boys. And this boy,
that happens to me in college. It happens to lots of Black people in white spaces.
Crazy.
Yeah.
But the Black boy I don't think at this point had like a ton of, it didn't bother him, right? Like he was friends with this other boy. I don't know how many conversations he's having about race in or out of school. I don't want to make that assumption. It just didn't bother him in a way that it might have bothered some other kids. But for the girl, the Black girl who was in the room, she was super aware of how problematic this was. Her mother also teaches this stuff at a college level, so she's kind of grown up around this. She was like, you can't do that. Stop touching and playing with his hair. And then they kind of like erupted into this conversation about like why that's racist or not racist. And then it ended up being this conversation with the white boy about, well, he was claiming that racism doesn't exist anymore, and that if it does exist, it's kind of for good reason. And like talking about, you know, crime rates, it just like went in this really horrible direction. And I ended up trying my very best. It just felt like such an opportunity and like a teaching moment, but it like the things that were being said were just so big, like it just couldn't, it was really hard to unpack all that was being said. So I was like, let's pause here. I'm gonna have some individual conversations, because at a certain point you can't, it's really hard to talk about that as a whole group when there are such very, like there are specific biases at play, specific, like personal context. So that was my hardest teaching moment to date. And it's something that I think about all the time. It's like, when are we talking about race and it turns into like a debate for someone's like humanity and dignity? And when is it like, no, you need to just stop talking and listen to the facts?
That's the big part, the last part you said about just listening. But I think a lot of times it's difficult, and even for myself as a Black man, when you're in a space where you are the minority voice, you don't have as many voices can share their different experiences being Black, and you feel like the burden is all on you to represent a whole group of whole culture of people. So even for a few kids in the class, it's like, yes, I think this conversation is important. Could be a great teachable moment, but I don't want to have to take on all of these people. I don't want everyone to be hanging on my every word as if my experience and my knowledge is the end all be all to the Black experience. So I know as a teacher, that's such a difficult moment, you know, and for you, just being aware that that was an opportunity just probably made you go back and find more tools so you can be better prepared if that situation comes up.
For sure.
You know,
it's just hard because like, I feel like my job is to like, I don't want any of my Black students to feel like they have to defend themselves, or like that they feel this, not defend themselves, but like that they feel this pressure and this responsibility to like teach their white peers. Like I feel like it really needs to be the teacher's job to like tell them to shut up and like listen to what's what.
And I think that goes back to your other point about also being the parent's job, especially if you're a kid. But if you're a white person, it's your role. It's not our role to educate you. I think if you are still on the side where you feel like racism doesn't exist, and now in this world, we're seeing everything going on, then I don't know what's going to help you see that. But for those of us who are aware that it does exist and see what's going on in the world, it's up to you to go do your research, to go do your work, so that you can, you know, force these conversations and contribute to these conversations, because you have a lot of power to influence the people around you who are racist or in positions that keep systemic racism going on. So a lot of times Black people we've been talking about this stuff for so long that one good thing I think is that at this moment, at least in the spaces that I'm in, a lot of the conversation doesn't feel like I have to lead the conversation anymore. It feels like other people are stepping up to try to lead the conversation or contribute. And I think that's a positive that we can take from it.
Yeah, I think like the thing that I've like learned the most in the last couple of years is like in teaching all this stuff is like, this is not Black people's issue to explain. This is like, white people need to go and get their people and be like, look at what we've done. Like this racism is a white person's issue. It was like the concept of race, which is like, we both know is like a social construct, like, you know, like scientific chromosome that indicates Black, white, whatever. Like it was a concept that was made up for social and political reasons to separate people. And that was done by white European people. And to this day, race and issues around race continues to be a white person's problem. it just so happens that the victims of that problem are Black people or people of color in general. So to me, it's like, it is not your job to explain your oppression.
Yeah.
It is the oppressor's job, or members of the oppressive group's job, to go and get their people and be like, look at what we've done. We need to stop. And these are the ways, these are the reasons why, and these are the ways that it happens.
Very true. Very true. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. I'm going to go to a quick light kind of moment, and then we'll go back into some more deeper stuff. So have you ever played the game Start, Bench, and Cut?
No. What is that?
So it's like, basketball. So start is like something that you would start, something that you would be in the starting lineup, right? Bench is like something that you would put on the bench. They're on the team, but they're not playing. And cut is just, they're off the team. Gone. They're not even capable to make the team. So start, bench, or cut. A rude parent, a rude student, or a rude colleague, and why?
Woo.
You probably experienced all three of these.
Oh, yeah. Oh my God. Okay. I would start a rude student, because with the rude student, there's always something deeper going on. And that's with every person in general. But with a kid, like, as a teacher, I'm like primed to like question, like, why did that, like, when a student behaves a certain way, it's really a form of communication.
Yes. They have some need that's not being met.
Right? So
I agree.
It's just about trying to understand, like, what are they really trying to communicate? Like, maybe they're not old enough, or they don't have the tools to really say what they mean to say. So I'm always here for the rude student. Like, we are going to figure each other out.
Now, the colleague or the parent? Who's going to go on a bench that's still on the team, or who's going to get cut? Like, get out my door. Get off the team.
Man, that's really hard.
Tough one, right? Tough.
I want to say, I guess I would cut the rude colleague. I'm going to cut the rude colleague, because we are in this thing together. We are in this profession together. I know everyone comes into teaching or whatever profession for different reasons, but with teaching, like, really we have an ultimate goal, or like a common goal. So if you're not with that, we're not going to be okay. You can get out. I found that it's really, really hard, like, with fellow teachers and colleagues in the building, to, like, you're either with it or you're not. And I find that the most challenging thing. Like, it's much harder to get a colleague who doesn't get it to get it.
Yeah.
With a parent, I'll bench them. I'll bench them, because they're the ones that scare me the most, in full transparency. But I don't know, we have a mutual love of their kid. Like, there's some common ground there. Yeah.
A lot of times I feel like parents are most of the time they're coming from the place of trying to support their kid as best as they can. Sometimes their approach may be off, but I do think at the core of it is they're just trying to fight and advocate for their child. So you can respect that as a teacher. But as a colleague, I would agree with you. I think rude colleagues, we're all in this fight, and it's not an easy career or job. So we should not definitely be rude to each other, because we're all on the same team, really trying to serve the same purpose.
Exactly.
That's
a good question.
I like that. I'm gonna keep that one in. I think that was good. I didn't know how it was gonna go, but it went really well. So moving back to the next segment. Are you aware of, like, the 1619 project? Have you heard about it? I've been hearing about it. I haven't done a lot of research on it, but I know you are really aware of things like this. Do you mind sharing your thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, I think the 1619 project is amazing. I think it's long overdue. I feel like in such a palatable, not palatable, I don't want to say that. It's a very accessible text. And it comes in both, like, podcast form for people who are more like auditory learners, like myself. It comes in, like, written texts, like article form. And I think that it takes this very long, complicated history, and it kind of streamlines it into this one chunked text. I think it's amazing. And I think it's like such a learning tool for adults, for kids. I think it's incredible.
So correct me if I'm wrong. I've been hearing a lot of people say that they're against it because they feel like it's anti-American or it goes against American values. What's the idea behind that? Are they saying that if we teach slavery or if we teach the history? Huh? What was that?
People think it's anti-American because racism is the most American thing ever. And so
that's what I was thinking.
Something that is anti-racist is the most anti-American thing. I also think it depends on, like, that depends also on your definition of being an American. Like, I want to try to lean into this belief that, like, America, while racism is at like the foundation of America, we can push past that, not push past it. We can try to restore, if everyone is on board, which that's the battle right now, right? Restore the harms that have been done and do things like embrace reparations and move forward from that. And then from there, embrace other parts of America that are great, that really truly are great, and redefine what it means to be American, and redefine, like, I don't know, like, when people say it's un-American to talk about race and to teach about our history of slavery and racism, I'm just like, y'all are in denial.
Yeah, it seems like they're trying to, like, avoid the harsh realities of what happened in the country and only focus on the positive. You can't heal if you only focus on the good sides about yourself and you keep the negative sides to the back. You have to also lean into that in order to really become the country that you promised or you portrayed.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like, I know that, like, you're really interested in, like, self-reflection and meditation and, like, therapy and things like I am too. And it's the same thing. We can't heal ourselves as a country, as an individual, if we're not, like, focusing on, like, the things that we need to change and work on and address in our past.
Agree.
And our present.
Yeah, definitely, because it's still existing. I agree. Thank you for sharing that. So the next segment is kind of called Closing the Achievement Gap. And I think what you mentioned about what you did before with your class kind of touches on this, but I'm going to throw it out there again. So what is a strategy that you use or to engage and support Black and Brown students and help close the achievement gap? And this is just, like, for ideas, so people watching this can, like, learn from that experience and maybe put it into their own classroom.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think that, like, in general, educating about, like, taking every possible opportunity, whether it's, like, in a social setting, like what I was talking about earlier with the kids in the advisory, or in an academic setting, like, try to take every possible opportunity to talk about race and racism and teach about it. Like, that right there is, I think, ultimately, if you're playing the long game, is going to help close the achievement gap, right? Like, people are understanding where that achievement gap comes from and why large groups are in the positions that they are in. How to close the achievement gap? I'm trying to think. This is a hard question. It
is. What is something you feel like you've done that you felt really benefited Black and Brown students in your classroom or in your school community? Whether you done it or you saw someone else do it or you heard about it, something of that sort.
I mean, things that have benefited. I mean, I think, like, talking about race and racism, I think, I also think that, like, teachers just, like, I think that oftentimes, like, teachers have, like, a teacher voice and teacher personality that's different from their real one. And they just kind of, like, have this habit of changing who they are. But I've found, and maybe this won't work for everybody, but I found that, like, not changing the way that I talk or the way that I act is, like, a model for, like, or, like, a reframing of what it means to be a professional. I think that there's a lot of discussion around, like, especially around Black and Brown children and adults, around what it means to look and act professional.
Yeah.
And so to model being a great teacher while also talking exactly the way that I talk and being very lax, again, playing the long game, it's kind of, like, disconnected, but eventually it gets connected. I think that is a part of closing the achievement gap, because if achievement is success in school, success in life, professional success, you know, getting money and things like that, then, like, we have to reframe what it means to be professional. And, like, Dr. Christopher Emdin talks about this. He has this whole TED talk where he talks about being a ratchetemic. And it's kind of a controversial thing, right? So some people are like, we shouldn't be, promoting this, but I think that you can talk however you want to talk, and that doesn't mean anything about your intellect or your level of like academia or anything like that. And so I think modeling that, promoting that is a part of closing the achievement gap for sure.
I agree. I think that was such a great response, because that's kind of something that I like to represent as a teacher as well. Because I know just growing up in the public school system, especially as a Black person, you don't see as many Black people in high positions, whether they're principal, assistant principal, or even teachers.
Yes.
To be honest, you often come into the building as a person of color, and you feel like you have to adjust. You have to put your true self in your back pocket and come in as someone else to fit in or to be professional, as you say. So the more we see people, like I try to do this, talk the way I talk, dress the way I dress, and just be myself, but still get the respect on a high level professionally, it can show kids of color that I can be myself and still achieve. I don't have to devalue who I am to the core just to fit in with American society. So the more kids see that, the more kids see representations of themselves in positions that are professional or positions of high, level, then it'll be inspired to know that they can be themselves and achieve. So I like that a lot.
It's it dissociates this idea of like speaking properly, which really means speaking like a white person.
Yeah.
It's all coded language.
Yeah.
With like being a professional, like it like uncouples I don't know. It's like the way we associate like peanut butter and jelly. Like it uncouples that association, and that's like what bias is, right?
Yeah.
It's like associations that we've like learned over time.
Yeah, we were conditioned to learn and believe over time, because we have to know that the people who built systemic racism into our society, into our school system especially, are people who market and brand at the highest level. So if they want people to be professional, they're going to make the qualities of someone who's professional fit their mold. And they're going to show qualities that you have naturally in your culture as being negative. So you're already at a disadvantage, right? So if we work to erase that or work against that, and intentionally and for the long term, like you said, thinking about the long game, then I think it will do wonders in terms of closing the achievement gap in that area. I agree. The last segment before I let you go is called Choose Your Teachers Wisely. So this is a chance for you to give a shout out. This shout out can be to anyone, or it could be a book, it can be a podcast, it can be a person, it can be a former teacher, or anyone in the past or present who has educated you on something that made you better. So this is your chance to give a shout out to them and explain why you're giving them that shout out.
Ooh, this is hard because I feel like I've been.
You can go many different areas, right? Pick one.
Okay. Ooh, one.
One.
Okay. So you said I can pick a text?
It can be text or audio, podcast, video, anything.
Okay.
Person, teacher.
I really need to shout out. I already shouted him out, but Dr. Christopher Emdin is my.
I would have guessed that one, so.
I know. I talk about him a lot. He is the guru for me on like, I mean, if it's not like, so he has this group called, I don't even know what to call it, group, he calls it hip hop ed. So he is always talking about like the crossover between hip hop music, hip hop culture, and teaching and education, and how that is like our greatest tool as educators. But he also like just has such a beautiful like philosophy and way of thinking about like Black and brown children and all of, I feel like people so often think about them as like the problem, like what is it about Black and brown children? Like why are they so hard to teach? And it's like, actually they're not. They're just, you teachers and like educators and thinkers need to rethink why you have one way of teaching that you are trying to fit for every kid. And so I cannot recommend his talks, his books enough. The book that kind of changed it all for me is For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood and the Rest of Y'all Too. And honestly, even if you're not a teacher, even if you're a parent, even if you're just whoever, like an average person, I think there's so much to be gained from that book. So yeah, big shout out to Dr. Chris Fremden.
Yes, I agree. I mean, you put me on to him. You shared his book with me. We went to one of his talks, and I agree. I think he's such a great person, and I think he deserves that shout out for sure.
And shout out to you, Boo.
Thank you. Shout out to you for coming on. I appreciate you so much. I hope you know that. Thank you for coming on. Hopefully this conversation can educate and inform a lot of people. Yes, thanks you so much. Thank you guys for tuning in. Stay blessed, and remember, education over everything. Thank you.